By your fruits I know you. Fruit of the most ancient tree, cousin of the knowing rose, a bold proposal disclosed in your slender, outstretched hands. The sweet preserve stubbornly concealed within warm cotton, now yielding of a sudden beneath fathoming fingers. A taut skin of sun-warm peach ruptures to slow fountain beyond the hornbeam wicket, unbolted by idleness. The harvest of full breasts grown in your ink-black soil, pomegranates of hellfire bursting with a seedy bliss, mistress of couches and wine wherein timelessness reclines in shameless snapshot moments, full flushed with pleasure's pigment. Yours it is to clench, to wrench forth from fools their hidden face. You hone the smallest of knives high upon your burnished thigh. Those who lie in wait for love cannot hope to ensnare you. You, who know what lies hidden, well dark beneath my blithe tongue, in her hair upon my face, in slow flexing tangled limbs, your soft skirts a spicery from which purring bees escape, to encircle your lithe waist in revels that blazing spring. You are the religious text, written with a drunken hand, the triumph of submission in the moment she says yes, a striking brick from on high dropped by a beguiling child, the music to which cats dance, midnight orchestras sighs. You open your softest doors, unfolding like a fable, when the blind and bloody shaft nails your navel from within. But to seek you in the mere, in congregations of dust, is to summon the surgeons of the long and lonesome night, unhearing, fearless and numb to my plaintive fledgling cries, which echo like gull laughter or girl children massacred, whose knives and blistering brands, leeches, barbs, and unwashed hands strangle the life of patience more surely than all illness. For I am desire's fruit, born of my longing for you. Hello, beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin for Semiagog, and tonight I'll be talking about strategy. I shouldn't have to emphasize it, but I'll do it anyway, as people are often foolish. In what follows, I'm not talking about taking up arms, acting outside the law, raising hell, or otherwise violating the ever so civilized civil contract. I'll be talking instead about strategies to shape discourse, opinions, cultural trajectories, and the like. If you want more context on what I mean when I say war, you can have a look at my clip from a few months back on unrestricted warfare entitled Last Message to the West. Why have I chosen this topic of discussion? Because the dissident right needs strategy, or perhaps I should say strategies. Strategies with pre-prepared guidelines for tactical application in the unrestricted war for the soul of the West, the war we see unfolding around us on all sides, in all domains of life. My view is that battle plans in this war of ideas should be conceived in advance. They should be debated and improved, and even tested in advance where this is possible. Only then should they be put into action, deployed on the game board, or perhaps shelved if necessary, set back in the arsenal of good ideas in anticipation of contingencies. But even this isn't enough. These various strategies should be integrated and orchestrated within higher tier strategies appropriate to clearly delineated theaters of action, whether these be ethnic, cultural, economic, psychological, legal, or whatever the case may be. In addition to contingency planning I already mentioned, there's also the ordinal dimension, no less than consideration of how various elements can or cannot be combined to amplify effectiveness. You think the commies, socialists, utopians, and others just come up with ideas willy-nilly? You think they just spitball concepts when they're out drinking, scribbling them down on cocktail napkins? You think they're working in atomized isolation? Do you imagine all they do is throw their collected ideas into a hat and then draw them out at random when they're in need of a plan? No, they don't. They are methodical, and they cooperate across the various scales of action. Think about the academic output of just the Frankfurt School. Think about the impact their ideas have had on everything from academic discourse to media headlines, and even legislation, all across the world. And that's just one small group thinking their way through strategy over a period of decades. And that's just what we see publicly from one circle that happened to operate for the most part in the light of day. Or take the coming new school to combat nationalism that Soros is said to be funding. You think he'll pay people to just wing it? I don't think so. This is why I'm always banging on about strategy. People often think as far as memes, as far as doxing, as far as public source investigations, troll campaigns, wedge driving, or misinformation. They think about slogans, they think about cartoons, maybe they think about songs and jingles, but they usually don't go much further. For example, it seldom occurs to people to use techniques or methods in combination. And even when some of these things are used in combinations, it's rarely in a well-considered way. The focus is usually on repetition, based on the idea of increasing the count, the governing conceptual archetype for doing things online that's been insinuated, unrecognized into our habits of mind as a result of prolonged exposure to the UI, prolonged immersion in the UX. This trains people to focus on the likes or retweets as the significant metric. This in turn shapes their thought. Whatever it is, do more of it. Whatever it is, get more people to see it. This all has its place, but when facing well-entrenched opponents who enjoy abundant resources and occupy superior positions, it's nowhere near enough to win victory. Of course, there are people who approach things more systematically, such as No White Guilt with his promotion of the idiolect he's been developing for quite some time, with the growing lexicon of expressions like meme pathogens or going free that he's putting into circulation. There's also his and Jared's prioritizing focus on community building. But he is among the exceptions. He and Jared, they're both among the exceptions. For the most part, we don't make moves of our own. It is rare that you'll see us place new pieces on the board. Rarer still that you'll see us change the game board itself. Instead, we plod along merely reacting to the moves we see being made. To use the dog English of the corporate world, we're not being proactive. That is, we're merely reacting. Worse still, we're usually forming those reactions based on consensus, which has never been a friend to breakthrough insights. Then there is the endless ocean of bullshit in which we float, receding as far as the eye can see in all directions, unending and uniform bullshit. There is no domain of lived experience that hasn't been invaded by the approved messaging, by the things we must or must not say or hear, always conveniently arranged in binary oppositions. It's almost as though we're trapped by an endless assortment of dialectical Chinese finger traps, the a priori framing and contextualization of anything worth discussing that constrains us to a kind of crisis tunnel vision, in which all the terms are fixed, and thus all the outcomes are predetermined, however much we might pull first from one direction, then from the other. It's no accident that reactionary is a term of abuse, a most contemptuous term of abuse, and rightly so, because those who are given the name deserve the scorn. They're too stupid to see what the players of dialectical games grasp immediately. Those who merely react are doomed to failure. Even today, there are those who accept being called reactionaries, who go so far as to refer to themselves as reactionaries. As has always been the case, the joke is thereby entirely on them. Reactionary is thus a name for those who are already doomed to merely respond, those who will always be found salivating and pawing at the door whenever the bell's ringing, those deprived of agency, those who will nevertheless congratulate themselves on the effectiveness of their rebellion. To take an example at random, we might react to the issue of abortion. We might respond by saying, abortion is wrong. Then we think about what the opposite of abortion might be. We come to discover that the entire territory is crisscrossed with dialectical concertina wire, mines, and trenches. We find ourselves driven ineluctably onto territory staked out as right to life, or perhaps in the other direction of pro-choice. But in either case, we'll be welcomed into one of the paired chapels of consensus, and high contrast ideological hymnals are always provided there at the door. This is a chain of reactions, or should I say it's how reactions can be used to enchain. Mind you, I'm not taking a position one way or another as regards abortion. Don't misunderstand me. I'm merely providing an example of how those who react will follow in the footsteps of others who have already formed reactions. And if you look far enough up to the head of the line, you'll often see that it's being led by a Judas goat. But enough of all that. Hopefully I've made it clear why I think we should be working harder to craft strategy. And I've provided all sorts of examples of strategic thinking in the past. You can have a look at my older content if you want to dig back into what's still up on YouTube. Now, I'd like to deal with more specific material. I'd like to have a look at sex, sexual activity, sexual license, and sexual commitment. Why? Well, it's simple, really. It's a major domain in which we should be thinking strategically and applying that thinking systematically. To understand what I'm getting at, look at the way leftists have weaponized sex. And how have we responded? In a reactionary way, of course. Some of us assert the importance of more traditional roles. We take a conservative position in the face of the progressive one. Instead of pushing forward, pointing out what we do stand for as an independent assertion, we jerk our finger backwards, which simply tightens the aforementioned dialectical Chinese finger trap. We thereby remain subject to the typical attacks about trying to turn back the clock, trying to retard progress, going back to a less enlightened time. And by contrast, the leftists get to carry the banner of freedom. They get to claim they're all about emancipation, all about breaking the chains and allowing us to be all we can be, free from benighted ignorance and bigotry. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. What's more, because these scrabble-babble rearrangers of letters have framed the dialectic as sexual freedom versus sexual repression, the forces of progress are able to continue to exploit our innate animal sexual drive and harness that energy for their own nefarious purposes. This dovetails perfectly with their grand strategy of focusing upon extension of adolescence, their focus upon retarding the process of maturation, upon subverting successive generations until all those who remain alive have been indoctrinated. When the argument is framed around those who get to experience sexual pleasure and those who don't, It's easy to see why their strategy has been so effective with young people. Young people are, of course, ruled by Venus. But the progressive approach, also has certain weaknesses. Weaknesses which we can exploit in the search for alternative narratives and alternative sets of deeply emotionally striking motivations. Among these is the fact that a drive towards sexual exploration and multiple partners tends to fall on the more masculine side of things. What we might call sexual conservatism, on the other hand, was for quite some time a citadel defended by our females. Recognizing this allows us to hypothesize females in particular might be susceptible to an alternative framing of the issues, not least because the emptiness of the progressive worldview on offer is becoming ever more starkly apparent. There's only so much makeup you can put on the corpse. There are only so many scented candles you can light. After a time, it becomes more and more difficult to imagine you're doing anything other than fucking a corpse. So we can see that we need to reframe the argument, and that it's possible there's value in targeting women as a group likely predisposed to be receptive to arguments in favor of sexual conservatism, if you will allow the expression. All that remains is to identify some existing biological drive, reflected in long-established culture, that might counterbalance what the utopian progressives are selling, one that we can offer to females as an alternative. Now, pair bonding immediately comes to mind. This is, of course, critical to raising children, given the very long period of neoteny we see in the natural process of human development. I don't have time to go into all of that here, but it's not just adolescence the progressives are weaponizing. At a deeper level, it is neoteny itself. Anyway, pair bonding and neoteny, or even their cultural reflection in marriage rituals and gender responsibilities, these don't have enough of an emotional hook to compete with sexual pleasure as a grand narrative, certainly not with young people. There's only one thing that can compete, a thing that we can identify deep down through our cultural history in the West. That thing includes the pair bonding drive, but goes much further. It's what we call love. With recognition of this fact comes the opportunity to take back control of our human sexuality by repositioning it within its proper historical and cultural context. Phrased another way, the opportunity is to refute and repudiate leftists who wantonly weaponize our sexuality and instinctive drives, and in the act of disarming them, to come to own true love once more. Who wouldn't want to control the true love brand? Instead of talking mostly about birth rates, pair bonding, marriage responsibilities, and all the genuine hard work that goes with that, we should be talking about love, monogamous love, and contrasting it with all the wasted time, the pain, stupidity, misadventures, and sadness that are so liberally intermixed with whatever pleasure unrestrained sexual abandon might offer. While progressives continue to employ Lysistrata strategies like #HotGirlsForBernie or teach anal sex to school children, we should be focusing on the traditional counterbalance our ancestors relied upon in the past in the face of all of this. The idea of love. The idea of true love. Of course, true love is a relatively new idea. In the past, marriages were arranged, or at a minimum, we were much, much less concerned about whether or not the parties involved were actually in love. But in the last century or two, we've come to hold up the notion of true love as an aspirational ideal. And it still strongly appeals to the hearts and minds of men and women in the West, regardless of whatever claims they might make to the contrary. If we were to pursue a strategy along these lines, it would be necessary to first work through various definitions of love, to parse our expressions of love and the circumstances in which we make them. The fact that we use the English word love to cover all sorts of different feelings reveals how vague our understanding actually is in this area. It's reflected directly in the ambiguity of our language. The Greeks distinguished between eros, philia, and agape at a minimum, for example, while we in turn just use one word to say we love moon pies and dark beer, love Taylor Swift, love our mothers, our sisters, our brothers, our fathers, our wives, and our children. We even love some of our coworkers. This suggests work would have to be done to raise awareness of different types of love and to mock those who fail to distinguish between them, while socially rewarding those who do. This would allow us to isolate and critique the notion of sex as love. Once upon a time, we used to be less gullible about this idea, much less gullible about this idea, as evidenced by Tim's old joke where the guy says, "Of course I love you, honey, I'm fucking you, ain't I?" Engaging in this sort of semantic dissection and creation or recharging of meaning might also allow us to better critique the whole scam of passing off pathological altruism as a species of love, thereby giving the lie to the belief that suicide is the only absolute and unquestionable proof of virtue for a white man. It might even give us the words and ideas we would most certainly need to circulate to reestablish awareness that there are noble forms even of self-love that have nothing to do with the base onanism currently so in fashion. Even eros itself could be subjected to more precise analysis, which might allow us to distinguish the spiritual, or at least the partially spiritual forms, from those that are merely carnal. There's quite a bit more involved in all of this. Semantic clusters and exploration of linguistic opportunities, even the crafting of new terms or the reintroduction of old ones would just be a part of it. We'd also have to trace archetypal themes and expressions of true love in our culture, especially those which have persisted relatively unchanged across centuries, in order to identify what we have to work with, paying special attention to anything that might have thus far escaped subversion or shown great resilience in resisting being twisted to subversive purposes. So we should identify memes and messages, myths, and stories from our past that could be systematically deployed for cultural uptake and circulation. We should identify and support those who might already be intuitively doing things along these lines that we know need to be done. We should also focus on working with women to develop better ways to talk to women and men about true love and its importance as an aspirational ideal and a model for behavior, instead of, or at least in addition to, all the trad wife talk and discussion of dimorphic gender roles. In addition to all of this, we should be pushing true love forward, front and center, and things that are not true love, mocked by contrast, front and center, as a part of a methodical and intentional strategy for increasing our cultural influence. I could literally talk about this all night, or I could drop it and take up another facet or dimension of strategy. It's what my mind is doing all the time. I can't help it. I mean, I really can't help it at all. Strategy of this sort, or much like it, is almost always in my thoughts. But while the example I've just given is an interesting one, and one I hope some viewers will carry further, particularly women, my main goal with this clip was to underscore the need for strategic thinking. Because there can be no question that the dissident right desperately needs to be more methodical and intentional in this respect. We have to begin planning ahead. We have to begin cooperating, even to the extent perhaps of assigning areas of action and responsibility, even things like specialization. We're under attack across a vast front. If we want to have any hope of winning, we'll have to begin thinking and acting based upon careful, strategic thinking. Get it? Got it? Good. Semiagog, out.